Hello everyone, in the previous video we assembled and painted this wonderful 1/72 scale PD38 model. Today it's time to create my first diorama on the channel based on a historical photo. Creating a diorama always starts with the base. I had a problem cutting a rectangle out of foam board evenly. I don't have a special foam cutter, so I decided to print the required shape on my 3D printer and use it as a template. This solution turned out to be very convenient. Not only is it easy to cut the foam board, but it's also easier to attach wooden details for decorating the sides when using the printed shape. Moreover, if you print the edges of the diorama in plastic, there might not be a need for wooden decorations, since the plastic serves the same purpose. Next, I worked a little with a knife to shape the base. The next step was working on the house. I modeled it in Blender and printed it using my FDM 3D printer. Initially, I thought about building the house by hand, but I had already done a similar video, and I wanted to test the capabilities of my 3D printer. I began the detailing by adding slats that act as beams for roof attachment. Once they were glued in place, I carefully trimmed the excess parts to avoid interfering with the next step. Then I cut a piece of thin cardboard to the required shape and prepared it for gluing. Before securing the roof, I needed to fill the upper gable of the building with wooden slats. This stage required precision, so I used double-sided tape instead of superglue. This allowed me to adjust the slat position before final attachment. After gluing the slats and removing the unnecessary elements, I got a wooden gable that looks great. Now I could attach the roof I had prepared earlier. The final step was adding two large roof parts and additional elements for their fixation. The result completely met my expectation. The house looks just as I envisioned it, neat, detailed and perfectly fitting into the overall composition of the future diorama. Next, I switched to creating other elements, with the first being the fence. To begin, I made a rough prototype to assess how the fence would look on the diorama and how well it would fit into the composition. This prototype worked great, covering the empty space without drawing attention to itself, just what was needed for this detail. Since the prototype was successful, I started creating the real fence. The work turned out to be delicate and meticulous. The board has to be cut to the same size to make the fence look neat. Then I glue a thick beam that not only supports the structure, but also adds variety to the composition. During the process, I decided that this wasn't just a fence, but a small gate. Once the gate was ready, it was time to mix my favorite texture paste. Previously, I used a mixture of plaster, PVA glue and acrylic paint. But now I have a new favorite. A mix of sand, PVA glue and acrylic paint creates perfect texture paste. I think this mix looks the same as a texture paste from well-known brands and is perfect for creating realistic surfaces. But if you decided to make such texture paste, keep in mind that the consistency should be like thick paste. To give this texture paste more realistic look, add small pebbles, roots and other tiny elements. Some people ask me why I add acrylic paint to the paste if the diorama is going to be painted anyway. The answer is simple. Sand has a light shade, and adding paint helps prevent light spots that could spoil the overall look. Also, the paint makes creating the texture easier, already during application. The surface looks like dirt, which is perfect for my goal. Then I experimented a bit with creating the crater. This is a sort of garbage pit where the remnants of Soviet artillery, which was stationed in this village. These details weren't in the historical photo, but I decided to add them to diversify the composition and avoid empty spots on the diorama. All the details, such as artillery remnants, were also printed on my 3D printer. And this is part of my new set, which will become the central element of my next diorama. It's very satisfying to see how my FDM 3D printer handles even such tiny elements. The next step was adding tank tracks and other details to make the rod look like a realistic rod, which must be a little bit destroyed and worn. To create the tracks, I use tank itself. Yes, it gets dirty, but that's not a problem since this part will be glued to the diorama. For texturing rod and dioramas, I use bamboo stick, tweezers and even a rough brush, which is great for the tapping technique. While the texture paste was still wet, I placed the remaining elements on the diorama. The gates, wooden planks near the house that locals could use to avoid walking in the mud, and a box printed on 3D printer to enhance the realism of the theme. After the texture paste fully dried, the result looks like this. As you can see, the color of the sand still slightly shows through the acrylic. But imagine how the diorama would have looked if I hadn't added acrylic. The difference is obvious. Now it's time to move on the next step – painting the diorama. First, I need to prime it completely. For this I use black acrylic to create additional artificial shadow and give the whole diorama a unified style. Next, I mix splatters, chocolate brown and basic flash colors from Vallejo and start applying this mixture to the diorama. The ground in the photograph has a mix of sand and clay, so black is not suitable here. Black soil is a complex task for modeling, and a bit of brown with yellow specks is a great solution for this. I use a darker shade to paint the logs and wooden parts of the house. After that, I move on to painting the detail located in the pit. Here I use Vallejo's Russian green to paint the remnants of artillery gun. After that, I add a light chipping. For painting the wooden elements of the house, I use the dry brushing technique. This method helps achieve a neat texture, especially for the front of the building and small wooden details. When everything dried, I moved on to the final stage, working on the details. First, I painted the windows blue. This color adds variety to the overall brown palette of the diorama, and blue worked perfectly. White color was also used for some detail on the window, creating contrast and brightness. Now, perhaps the most unexpected tool I used in modeling – regular creative pencils. I bought them at the supermarket and decided to test them out with the dry brushing technique. And you know what? I wasn't wrong. Just look at how well the pencil highlights the small stones. Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised by how well it works with the texture paste I used. Of course, the commercial product is a ready-made solution that you simply apply, but the result from using a pencil really impressed me. Now it's time to work with the wash. I'll start with dark yellow wash to diversify the brown texture of the diorama. After drying, I'll use my favorite oil wash with Van Dyke brown paint to slightly reduce the yellowish tone and add artificial shadows, which Van Dyke does wonderfully. Here is how this effect look after drying. Now my road and the pits with the remnants of Soviet artillery look like something destroyed, dirty and somewhat abandoned. This adds to the atmosphere of devastation that I wanted to achieve. Here is how the diorama looks after wash had been applied to all parts. Now I'll focus on the work with the house. For this I also mixed a brown wash with light ochre and will cover the entire house and the gate nearby with it. And now you're probably noticed that there is one important detail missing from the house – the windows. It's time to work on them. To create a window I used this thick transparent film, measured the necessary size and started cutting out the windows. Then I decided to try making blast wave protection, like me and my girlfriend used at the beginning of the war. We used simple transparent tape and glued it on the window to protect against shrapnel. Of course, the glass still can break, but with this protection the shards will be larger and easier to remove from your body. Of course, I'm joking. As for the windows for diorama, they didn't turn it out quite well. I understand why this happened. The windows should have been made differently and painted separately from the house model. I need to keep that in mind for the future. So for now we move on to the final stage of the diorama work. Since I am not planning to use epoxy resin for the water effect just yet, I decided to imitate wet mud with a matte varnish. It's a simple but effective solution to achieve the desired effect. And that's it, my friend. The first diorama based on a historical photo is complete. Of course, I could add more detail, add epoxy resin, bushes or plants, but I decided not to overload the composition. The main focus should be on the tank. And that means that I will say goodbye for you. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe if you want. Be sure to check out my links where you'll find many free 3D models as well as model available for a symbolic price. Or its model you can just grab for free. This was as always Vlad from the No Quality channel. I wish you all a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year. I think in 2025 all our dream come true. We just need to work and keep our mental health and health of our body in good condition. Goodbye and see you soon, my friend. Cheers!